The blade scrapes against polymer with the methodical precision of ritual. Trooper Alexei Korvin of the Vostroyan 47th Mechanized draws his combat knife across his lasgun stock, carving the 15th mark with deliberate care. Each scratch represents 1 hour of expected operational life, not superstition, but statistical acknowledgement. The marks bite shallow into the weapon's surface, equidistant and purposeful, joining thousands of similar tallies carved across the transport bay, where men prepare for mathematical certainty. This is policy acknowledgement. Departamento Munitorum Circular 866.M41 codified what battlefield reality had whispered for decades. On the Imperium's deadliest fronts, average post-deployment life expectancy measures exactly 15 hours. The number appears in logistics tables beside bread rations and promethium allotments, treated with the same administrative certainty as ammunition consumption rates. Commanders recite it as catechism, commissars attach it to duty rosters. The mathematics of death have become doctrine. The black basilica plain spreads before us like a stone sea glazed in ash, Tertius Hive's eastern approach, where geography conspires with artillery to create perfect killing conditions. 3 regiments have already been consumed here: the Talon 23rd Desert Raiders, the Mordian 88th Iron Guard, and most recently the Cadian 91st Shock Troops. Their casualty reports read like infantry shrinkage calculations, neat columns recording human variance within acceptable parameters. The basilica's shattered spires loom on the horizon like broken teeth, and between them lies 47 square kilometers of industrial wasteland where visibility drops to 12 meters during standard atmospheric conditions. Our method follows the imperial system itself. Macro ledgers, tracking where bodies become accounting entries, meso-institutional orders converting those ledgers into discipline, and micro-vignettes gathered from dugouts and aid stations where survival is whispered grammar. The sources maintain their own reliability. Casualty tables do not lie, they merely smooth. Commissariat circulars do not invent, they merely command. Soldiers do not analyze, they remember. Circular 866 M41 sits in brigade files, its signature block obscured behind censor lacquer and redaction ink. The authorship remains classified beyond 3 layers of administrative seal, marked only with authority confirmed, inquiry prohibited. An attached addendum standardizes the tally ritual, designed to harmonize morale expectation with operational reality. The document's confidence feels devotional, but here devotion functions as supply management. Someone calculated that 15 hours optimized logistics flow, and mathematics became fate. In mess lines that snake along crater rims, stories circulate with careful euphemism. Veterans speak of angels at the 12th hour, describing unexplained survival events that occur precisely 3 hours before statistical termination. Artillery cessation without explanation. Enemy withdrawal patterns that defy tactical logic. Equipment malfunctions that create temporary survival windows. The accounts maintain consistent timing but offer no mechanism for their occurrence, and official reports contain no reference to such interventions. Sergeant Mikhail Korvac represents statistical deviation incarnate. 3 previous deployments, 41 documented combat hours, survival metrics that exceed mathematical probability by factors requiring commissariat investigation. When questioned about technique, he responds with approved doctrine, while his eyes suggest knowledge that cannot be officially shared. The system produces anomalies it cannot explain and survivors it cannot replicate. Fire Plan 7B governs the next 15 hours through mathematical precision rendered as artillery doctrine. The barrage schedule advances in 2-minute lifts per 100-meter intervals, battery coordination managed through VoxNet protocols requiring specific challenge codes. The document shows moisture damage along its margins, ink smudges obscuring critical timing notations where a clerk's hand slipped in the fog. The plan assumes men move as neatly as numbers advance, a beautiful economy, lethal in its trust. Preparation rituals unfold with mechanical devotion across the transport bay. A training sergeant fits respirator masks with the patience of machinery maintenance. A priest walks trenches marking shoulders with Auspex inked thumbs, promising not victory, but sequence. Confession schedules appear between fire orders. The boundaries blur between piety, policy, and procedure, creating a unified system where survival becomes statistical compliance. The chronometer above the deployment bay synchronizes with regimental standard as transport engines achieve operational temperature. Around Corvin, 437 soldiers carry their own acknowledgement of mathematical destiny, each bearing 15 scratches carved into personal equipment. The transport bay fills with equipment checks, whispered prayers, and the soft scraping of knives against weapon stocks as more marks join the ritual count. We will follow these hours as the Departamento designed them, and as men must survive them, asking why clean numbers govern dirty worlds and why the hand that wrote mathematics into law cannot be named. We will test whether angels descend at the 12th hour and what price they exact for intervention. We will watch fire plan precision meet human breath, doctrine meet deviation, survival meet system. The clocks reconcile, the ledgers close, contact hour 0 begins, contact hour 0 begins, and the plane answers with geometry. The black basilica's shattered spires loom on the horizon like broken teeth, fixed points in a range table that transforms landscape into equation. Between them stretches 47 square kilometers of vitrified slag over broken ferrocrete, ribbed with collapsed conduits that channel movement into predictable gutters. This is not merely a battlefield, it is an engineered consumption zone, a landscape meticulously designed to fulfill its statistical quota through applied mathematics. Artillery parks nest in concentric rings around the basilica's ruins, their positions calculated through trigonometric precision that eliminates dead ground through overlapping fire zones. The outer ring houses basilisk self-propelled guns positioned at maximum effective range, creating interlocking fields that sweep the plain in methodical arcs. Inner rings contain Griffin heavy mortars and Earthshaker cannons, their trajectories plotted to intersect at predetermined kill zones marked on maps with clinical notation. No terrain feature exists by accident. Every crater, every rubble pile, every apparent cover position has been surveyed, ranged, and incorporated into fire solutions that treat human shelter as mathematical problem requiring artillery answer. Macro battery emplacements crown the basilica's remaining spires, their massive guns traversing on schedules that coordinate with ground-level systems. The batteries operate on quarter-hour rotations, their targeting solutions updated through Auspex feeds designed to penetrate the chemical fog blanketing the battlefield. This fog represents deliberate atmospheric engineering, a cocktail of industrial waste and metallic aerosols that defeat standard Imperial Auspex equipment while leaving enemy targeting systems unimpaired. Visibility oscillates between 6 meters in troughs and 30 in transient clearings before the wall closes again, creating a disorienting environment where engagement ranges collapse to knife-fighting distance. Beneath the fog, servitor-seeded minefields operate like mechanical ecosystems programmed with quarter-hour activation schedules that coordinate with artillery lifts. Their housings disguise themselves among slag and bear purity seals long dissolved by the corrosive air. Each field cycles through 12 minutes of armed hunger, followed by 3 minutes of reset, while their cogitators purge false positives and rekey to new mass signatures. This interval appears in battery manuals and is whispered by veterans as the soft minute, though the window proves anything but soft when fire plan timing misaligns and movement slumps into the next armed cycle. The mines respond to pressure, heat, and electromagnetic signatures through logic circuits that distinguish between friend and foe with brutal efficiency, clustering around natural approach routes to channel advancing forces into predetermined engagement areas. The enemy functions as pure mathematical opponent, their doctrine stripped of personality and reduced to operational parameters. They range targets through methodical observation, conserve ammunition through disciplined fire control, and execute counter-battery missions according to templates that respond to Imperial artillery. With clockwork precision, counter-battery returns arrive within 1 to 3 minutes of a muzzle flash, calculated through sound-ranging augers buried in the slag. When a company goes to ground, hostile batteries lift, count the pause, then lay steel along likely egress angles, prioritizing junctions where drainage channels meet pipelines. This is not malice but economy, warfare as engineering problems solved through applied mathematics rather than heroic gesture. The logistical calculus governing advance across this killing ground begins with tonnage. Imperial doctrine calculates consumption rates of 4.2 tons of shells per kilometer advanced, assuming standard resistance and acceptable casualty variance. Transport capacity limits restrict resupply operations to predetermined intervals, creating vulnerability windows where advancing forces must survive on carried ammunition. The bottleneck proves literal. A shattered overpass funnels all traffic down to a 43-meter choke that enemy guns know by heart, turning every supply run into statistical exercise in acceptable loss. Company Commander Joral explains the mathematics with clinical precision while reviewing deployment maps. His map case is heavier than his rifle. "Distance equals death," he states without raising his voice, tapping coordinates with a greased finger. At 3.7 kilometers, our line outpaces water, filters, charge packs, and tube cooling. Past that mark, I start buying lives with promises I cannot redeem. He points to the medical station icon boxed in red. Evacuation at range becomes ablation. We feed the field to keep the barrels cool. Fire Plan 7B emerges from this framework as artillery doctrine rendered into temporal precision, its creeping barrage advancing in 2-minute lifts per 100-meter intervals. The document spreads on a folding table, translucent where moisture has seeped into the fibers. The margins show smudges where ink and fog made their treaty, obscuring critical timing notations where a clerk's hand slipped. The plan assumes perfect vinculum between mathematics and footfall, that lungs will accept the timing and muscles maintain pace under 60 kilograms of equipment. But respirator filters begin clogging at the 70-minute mark under current particulate density, increasing respiration cost and slowing movement. Men fall behind the lift, creating vacuums that both enemy fire and mines fill with mechanical precision. The terrain itself functions as hourly ledger, engineered to consume specific numbers of lives per hour through systematic design. Drainage channels intersect at intervals matching mine reset windows, creating forced pauses exactly when fields rearm. Ferrocrete berms run obliquely to objectives, pushing formations to turn and present flanks. Collapsed pipe fields produce resonant hollows that confuse sound ranging, which counter-battery doctrine resolves by saturating with fixed allotments regardless of actual occupancy. Each feature costs lives at projected rates that brigade staff can overlay like weather maps, watching colors change as ammunition stocks deplete and bodies enter the machine. When we designate this the deadliest battlefield, we invoke not volume but efficiency. The plane can absorb 3 regiments because the timing mesh between guns, fog, mines, and movement has been calibrated across months of fighting into a production line for casualties. The enemy participates willingly, so do we. The difference lies in how our ledgers classify the cost as sacred while treating the mechanism as inevitable. This killing architecture requires constant feeding to maintain its mathematical efficiency. The geometry creates appetite that must be satisfied through systematic delivery of human material, processed according to specifications that transform civilians into statistical casualties. The Departamento does not requisition soldiers, it requisitions unit weights of flesh, processed to specification and delivered on schedule. The machinery that accomplishes this transformation operates far from the basilica, in rooms where names become quotas and signatures convert breathing citizens into columns of expendable mathematics. The machinery that accomplishes this transformation operates far from the basilica, in administrative centers where breathing citizens become columns of expendable mathematics. The Vostroyan 47th, mechanized, represents typical output from this system, currently at 67% strength after processing through the Imperial conscription apparatus. Their depleted ranks speak to the efficiency of both the killing architecture we have mapped and the harvesting system that replenishes it with systematic precision. Planetary tithes begin the conversion process through calculations that treat populations as renewable resources managed through mathematical quotas. Vostroya contributes 17% of military-age population annually, a figure derived from population density tables, industrial capacity assessments, and strategic expendability rankings that classify worlds by their replaceability within imperial logistics networks. The Departamento Munitorum maintains detailed matrices comparing birth rates against casualty requirements, ensuring sustainable extraction that maintains planetary productivity while meeting military demands. These are not requests but mathematical imperatives flowing from the Emperor's will down to individual family units. Processing centers operate like industrial facilities designed to strip identity and install imperial compliance through systematic dehumanization. At Conscription Station Tertius Gamma, civilians enter through intake bays marked with purity seals and emerge as numbered infantry bearing regimental designation. Medical evaluations reduce human complexity to capability metrics measured by servo skulls and recorded by scribes: visual acuity, respiratory capacity, muscular, endurance, psychological compliance ratings. A cogitator processes blood samples and bone density scans, then outputs tactical classifications that assign roles based on measured parameters rather than personal aptitude. Height determines rifle assignment. Weight influences equipment load calculations. Blood type affects casualty evacuation priority. Sergeant Mikhail Korvac embodies statistical anomaly within this system, a third deployment veteran whose 41 documented combat hours exceed mathematical probability by margins requiring commissariat investigation. His survival makes him invaluable as informal teacher while simultaneously suspicious as doctrinal deviation. Korvac moves through barracks like walking contradiction, officially commended for endurance while unofficially monitored for heretical independence. When he demonstrates equipment maintenance, his hands suggest knowledge that cannot be officially shared. Trooper Yekta represents ideal system output, a first deployment conscript whose faith in imperial doctrine remains uncompromised by battlefield experience. She recites creed passages with mechanical precision and follows orders without question, embodying the psychological compliance that training programs seek to install. Her equipment bears factory freshness. Her expectations align perfectly with official mortality projections. Yekta believes the 15-hour calculation represents enemy capability rather than imperial policy, making her psychologically prepared to fulfill statistical requirements. Medic Senna occupies dangerous middle ground between faith and experience, maintaining informal casualty predictions based on observed patterns rather than official doctrine. Her medical training provides analytical framework for understanding human fragility, while field experience reveals gaps between theoretical survival and practical reality. Senna carries unauthorized notebooks recording symptoms, treatments, and outcomes that diverge from approved medical protocols, creating knowledge that could prove invaluable or heretical depending on commissariat interpretation. The fundamental contradiction embedded in imperial training reveals itself through curriculum emphasis that prioritizes imperial creed memorization over tactical survival instruction. Conscripts spend 60 hours learning liturgical responses for every hour devoted to battlefield medicine or tactical movement. Combat training focuses on following orders rather than independent decision-making, creating soldiers psychologically prepared for martyrdom but poorly equipped for survival. The system deliberately produces compliance over competence, ensuring doctrinal purity at the cost of tactical effectiveness. Underground information networks emerge among veterans as natural response to this institutional failure, operating within imperial discipline structures through careful euphemism and coded instruction. Veterans like Korvac share survival knowledge through equipment modification, demonstrations, and maintenance sessions that teach unauthorized techniques. These networks function through ritualized knowledge transfer that appears to support imperial doctrine while actually subverting it through practical application. Information travels via barter, dry socks for safe path diagrams, LHO sticks for counter-barrage warnings. The networks teach posture, not rebellion, existing to shave the statistical curve without breaking the institutional machine. The pipeline continues with mechanical inevitability as replacement drafts board transports and disembark into staging areas where the 47th waits with empty seats like missing teeth. Readiness spikes from 67 to 83% on morning reports, and supply tables breathe easier. The models anticipate smooth return to 67% within 15 hours of contact, with variance accepted and triumph defined as mathematical convergence. When statistical models encounter individual human psychology through these networks, the result creates tension between mathematical prediction and psychological reality. The 15-hour calculation assumes uniform human response, but individual variations disrupt logistical planning through unpredictable outcomes that the networks attempt to address through unauthorized competence within authorized compliance. When statistical models encounter individual human psychology through these networks, the result creates tension between mathematical prediction and psychological reality. But to understand how this tension became institutionalized, we must trace the mathematics themselves through archived Vox memos that reveal their bureaucratic genesis. The 15-hour calculation that governs life and death on the Black Basilica Plain originated not from battlefield observation but from administrative necessity, buried in the data vaults beneath subsector command, where dust-sealed records preserve the transformation of logistics into liturgy. The document trail begins with a mid-level Munitorum analyst designated only as Quaestor Tertiary Valdris, facing a problem familiar to administrators across the Imperium. Fronts fluctuate, but convoys do not. His initial Vox memo, dated 847 M41, requested permission to develop Unit Endurance Index modeling to reduce what he termed supply variance irregularities across protracted engagements. The language remains clinical, mathematical, absent any reference to human cost. Valdris approached mortality as a manufacturing variable requiring standardization. The 15-hour figure emerged through pure mathematical convergence, where multiple supply curves intersected at optimal efficiency. Trial calculations, tested against 17 separate engagements, revealed the elegant symmetry. 9 hours failed to cover standard assault and counter-assault cycles. 21 hours demanded too many medevac sorties for the available frigate pool. 18 hours collided, with macro transport windows calculated in 30-hour rounds. 15 emerged as the least bad compromise across competing schedules, aligning perfectly with 3 5-hour ration blocks per soldier, reducing waste by 12%, while maximizing transport utilization. The mathematics create more than efficiency. They create institutional dependency. Priest rotation assignments align with 15-hour cycles, ensuring spiritual coverage without redundancy through canonical rotations of 5 litanies before vocal fatigue. Medical evacuation schedules operating on 15-hour intervals maximize shuttle throughput while maintaining crew safety limits. Even the grisly economics of corpse starch collection cycles achieve optimal efficiency when timed to 15-hour intervals, allowing processing facilities to maintain steady throughput without storage bottlenecks that would disrupt the supply chain, feeding billions across the subsector. Commissars received Circular 8666.M41 through standard doctrinal channels, but their interpretation converted mathematical projection into spiritual imperative. Training bulletins from the Officio Prefectus demonstrate systematic transformation of statistical convenience into sacred duty. Hold 15, earn absolution appears first as suggested motivational framework, then evolves through institutional repetition into liturgical response that soldiers recite during equipment checks. The mathematics acquire religious significance through bureaucratic momentum, becoming articles of faith rather than logistical projections. The administrative horror reveals itself through systematic redaction applied to the circular's origins. Valdris's signature block disappears behind censor lacquer applied by scribes following protocol administratum tertius, which mandates anonymity for documents achieving doctrinal status. Personnel records transfer to sealed archives. The human author vanishes into institutional memory, leaving only mathematical legacy that functions as divine revelation rather than bureaucratic calculation. Someone made this decision, but the system ensures that someone cannot be questioned, blamed, or held accountable for the consequences. Critical exclusions embedded within the statistical methodology reveal deliberate data manipulation designed to maintain mathematical purity. The 15-hour curve excludes administrative misadventure, deaths, friendly fire incidents, logistics failures, equipment malfunctions, accounting errors that would disrupt the elegant framework Valdris constructed. These deaths receive separate classification as variance acceptable and disappear from casualty projections used for supply planning. When ammunition pallets are misrouted to wrong battalions, the resulting deaths dissolve from the record along with evidence of systemic failure. The system maintains statistical integrity by defining inconvenient reality as measurement error. Commanders throughout the subsector begin planning operations to achieve the 15-hour standard rather than responding to battlefield conditions. Brigade staff meetings reveal this institutional transformation through archived planning documents that treat the circular as tactical doctrine. Attack schedules align with 15-hour intervals, withdrawal orders activate at 14-hour marks, relief rotations deploy according to mathematical timing rather than operational necessity. The number becomes parameter that commanders enforce through disciplinary action when units exceed or fall short of statistical expectations. The mathematics acquire institutional momentum that transforms projection into requirement through system-wide recalibration. Supply chains reorganize around 15-hour cycles. Medical protocols standardize around 15-hour patient throughput. Chaplain services schedule around 15-hour spiritual cycles. The entire Imperial war machine recalibrates to serve mathematical efficiency rather than tactical effectiveness, creating dependency on predictable casualty rates that must be maintained regardless of battlefield conditions. Administrative enforcement mechanisms emerge to ensure statistical compliance through disciplinary frameworks that treat deviation as doctrinal failure. Units surviving beyond 15 hours face supply restrictions as punishment for disrupting logistics schedules. Commanders reporting casualty rates below mathematical projections undergo commissariat investigation for potential falsification. The system develops antibodies against its own success, ensuring mathematical compliance through institutional pressure that makes survival beyond the curve feel like betrayal rather than victory. Valdris's elegant solution to supply variance becomes iron law governing human mortality, mathematics transformed into fate through institutional momentum that no individual can challenge. The circular achieves final transformation through repetition and enforcement until mathematical projection becomes operational reality that the system must fulfill to maintain its own coherence. Why does the system require predictable death rates to function, and what institutional mechanisms enforce this statistical compliance, even when it conflicts with tactical success? The answers lie not in doctrine, but in the machinery of administration itself, where human life becomes another resource requiring efficient management through mathematical precision. Why does the system require predictable death rates to function, and what institutional mechanisms enforce this statistical compliance even when it conflicts with tactical success? The answers emerge not through theory but through application as Valdris's elegant mathematics encounter the corrosive reality of the black basilica plane. Our zero begins with the mechanical precision of deployment protocols executing according to timetables calculated in distant offices by administrators who will never breathe the poisoned air or feel the ground shake under hostile batteries. Valkyrie turbines scream across the plain as the 15-hour countdown initiates, their formation descending through anti-aircraft fire that responds with mathematical precision. Pilot Commander Voss maintains formation discipline while calculating acceptable losses versus mission parameters through equations that treat his aircraft as expendable assets rather than irreplaceable resources. The mathematics prove immediate. 2 transports vanish in flowering explosions that enemy gunners achieve through targeting solutions optimized for Imperial casualties within acceptable transport losses. The pilots speak in figures instead of prayers, their voices carrying fuel-to-fire ratios and expected counter-battery reaction times across Vox channels that crackle with professional detachment. The drop zone reveals accumulated detritus of systematic consumption through abandoned equipment that tells stories in rust and blast patterns. Cadian helmets nest among Vostroyan greatcoats, their unit markings still visible beneath chemical corrosion that has eaten through ceramite and flesh with equal appetite. Ammunition crates stand empty beside medical kits, whose contents have been scavenged by survivors who lived beyond their statistical allocation. Laser gun power cells lie scattered like metallic seeds across ground, churned and rechurned by successive waves of deployment, each leaving its signature in discarded equipment and shallow graves where the mathematics encountered human resistance and prevailed through patient accumulation. Soldiers immediately implement survival protocols that emerge from underground knowledge networks rather than official training, their movements revealing systematic preparation that contradicts Imperial doctrine. Equipment modification begins before boots settle into slag, as veterans augment respirator filters with oil-soaked gauze and charcloth cut from ration boxes. Trooper Yekta watches with confusion as these modifications violate supply regulations but extend filter effectiveness by 40% through unauthorized alterations that constitute technical heresy against the sacred machine spirits inhabiting Imperial equipment. Information trading establishes informal hierarchies based on survival competence rather than institutional rank, as veterans like Sergeant Korvac possess knowledge that junior officers lack. Maps appear showing safe routes unmarked on official charts. Water purification techniques circulate through whispered instruction. Communication workarounds develop using hand signals and sound codes that maintain coordination when official Vox nets collapse under enemy jamming or atmospheric interference. Each innovation represents accumulated wisdom that cannot be officially acknowledged because it requires abandoning approved procedures. Death insurance agreements formalize these survival networks through practical arrangements that ensure knowledge transfer and resource distribution among soldiers who understand their statistical fate. Veterans establish mentorship relationships with conscripts, trading survival instruction for loyalty and promising to carry messages home if the mathematics prove accurate. These agreements function as unofficial insurance policies against institutional abandonment, creating human bonds that transcend regimental structure and administrative convenience while operating entirely outside official recognition. The teaching process reveals fundamental contradiction between survival effectiveness and doctrinal compliance, as Korvac begins sharing tactical knowledge that directly contradicts official training. He demonstrates equipment modifications through subtle example, how to clear a jammed lasgun with swift percussion rather than prescribed field stripping, how to maximize minimal cover through economical movement that abandons parade ground formations. Every effective survival technique requires abandoning some element of imperial doctrine, creating impossible choices between effectiveness and compliance that will define the remaining 14 hours and 57 minutes. First contact initiates as enemy forces respond to insertion with mechanical precision, their counter-deployment following templates that treat imperial tactics as predictable variables in mathematical equations. Artillery falls according to schedule, targeting landing zones with shells timed to arrive as transports depart. The enemy demonstrates systematic understanding of imperial deployment patterns through intelligence gathering that penetrates operational security or mathematical analysis that predicts imperial behavior through statistical modeling. Their response validates the 15-hour calculation through applied lethality that treats human life as infantry requiring systematic depletion. The Commissariat observes these developments through trained eyes that evaluate compliance as carefully as they measure courage, preparing to enforce mathematical destiny through disciplinary mechanisms that transform statistical projection into institutional requirement. Commissar Valdek carries his own mathematics like a sidearm, his copy of Circular 8666.M41 dog-eared from use rather than belief. Every margin bears figures aligning morale reports with casualty expectations, creating bureaucratic framework around death that ensures compliance rather than survival. The Officio Prefectus grants him quotas that sound clinical when whispered during equipment inspections, projected losses by hour, confessional throughput by platoon, motivational termination authority capped per day, unless morale contagion exceeds threshold parameters. These are not suggestions but mathematical imperatives requiring documentation and enforcement through systematic application of disciplinary pressure that treats deviation as heresy regardless of tactical effectiveness. The punishment ladder operates with practiced precision through absence, refusal, and contagion classifications that reduce human complexity to administrative categories. Absence captures the soldier who slips beneath fog at the wrong minute and fails to present for count. Refusal identifies the pause that blooms when orders conflict with survival instinct. Contagion describes what happens when rational fear spreads through informal networks that question mathematical certainty. Each step receives annotation by precedence and filing afterward with the same care as ammunition receipts, creating bureaucratic permanence for decisions that eliminate human problems through applied violence. Paperwork makes courage measurable through morale audits that quantify zeal, confession schedules designed to process guilt before it sours, and kill quotas that read like inventory management rather than tactical objectives. Every soldier represents an asset with expected attrition rates, and any deviation triggers inquiry that resolves discrepancies through disciplinary action rather than tactical adjustment. This creates the institutional crisis that will define the next 14 hours. Effective survival tactics require abandoning doctrine, but doctrine abandonment triggers disciplinary response that reduces survival to restore predictability. Fireplan 7B synchronizes with commissariat schedules through administrative coordination that treats spiritual and material destruction as complementary processes. Confessions are ordered at 5th and 10th hours because units break there. Exhortations are delivered before the 8th hour lift because fear peaks then. Random inspections puncture the 13th hour because fatigue breeds doubt. The timing appears pastoral but functions as administrative necessity, ensuring that morale enforcement aligns with artillery schedules to maximize compliance during critical vulnerability windows. Challenge and response codes create additional enforcement opportunities through systematic failure that generates disciplinary justification. Today's authentication sheets bear moisture damage that smears critical sequences, while yesterday's codes travel forward with today's rations through supply chain confusion that transforms administrative incompetence into tactical crisis. Missing Vox challenges create deadly coordination gaps that commissariat observers classify as potential insubordination rather than systemic failure, providing legal framework for summary discipline when survival requires unauthorized initiative. The mathematics extend beyond bullets to encompass executions managed through inventory protocols that treat motivational termination as supply management. Guidance authorizes up to 3 executions per company per diurnal interval, with discretionary expansion when contagion signs appear, and reporting requirements that mirror ammunition expenditure documentation. The language remains careful while the intent proves blunt. Fear that calcifies units will be broken through example, then filed as paperwork that makes broken pieces disappear into variants acceptable. H-hour approaches with mechanical inevitability as orders arrive through channels that cannot be questioned, only fulfilled. The choice between effectiveness and compliance becomes immediate practical question as soldiers face the mathematics that govern their expected lifespan, while human agency refuses to accept statistical fate. Administrative timing meets battlefield reality where survival beyond the curve carries dangers that make questioning numbers as lethal as ignoring them, and the machine prepares to test whether 15 hours represents prediction or requirement through applied violence that will validate or refute Valdris's elegant calculations through systematic consumption of human material processed according to specifications designed in distant offices by hands that will never shake with fear or steady weapons against approaching death. The machine prepares to test whether 15 hours represents prediction or requirement through applied violence that will validate or refute Valdris's elegant calculations through systematic consumption of human material processed according to specifications designed in distant offices by hands that will never shake with fear or steady weapons against approaching death. H-hour arrives with mechanical punctuality as chronometers synchronize across the black basilica plane, and mathematics transforms into physics through the precise application of high explosives delivered according to Fireplan 7B's calculated progression. The sky tears under basilisk fire as the creeping barrage initiates its mathematical advance across 47 square kilometers of killing ground, each shell following trajectories calculated to move in 2-minute lifts per 100-meter intervals with clockwork precision. The sound builds like industrial machinery achieving operational tempo, a mechanical rhythm that transforms landscape into equation through systematic destruction designed to clear predetermined paths for infantry advance. Battery commanders coordinate through Vox channels crackling with range corrections and ammunition tallies, their voices maintaining professional detachment while orchestrating violence that will either validate or invalidate 15 years of statistical modeling through immediate practical application measured in tons of steel and human casualties. Trooper Yekta advances through the barrage counting steps and reciting prayers with mechanical precision that mirrors the artillery falling ahead of her position her litanies matching the 2-minute rhythm as she recites Canticle Tertius during each lift. Her respirator filters the chemical fog through factory-standard systems that struggle against particulate density exceeding design parameters, each breath costing more than fireplan calculations assumed. She maintains formation discipline according to approved tactical doctrine, embodying the psychological preparation that training programs seek to install through systematic conditioning that treats survival as secondary to obedience. 8 steps: inhale, 7 steps, exhale, the catechism braided through the hiss of standard filtration that clogs incrementally with each meter advanced. Sergeant Korvac moves through the same barrage using survival modifications that contradict official doctrine while preserving tactical effectiveness through accumulated knowledge that cannot be officially acknowledged. His respirator bears unauthorized alterations extending filter life by 40%, oil-soaked gauze and charcloth cut from ration boxes creating breathing apparatus that functions when approved equipment fails. His movement follows routes that exploit terrain features unmarked on official maps, but known through experience exceeding statistical probability, reading ground through accumulated wisdom about mine cycles, drainage patterns, and enemy observation posts that official reconnaissance missed or classified incorrectly. Medic Senna treats casualties under fire while maintaining informal casualty predictions based on observed patterns rather than official projections, her medical training providing analytical framework for understanding human fragility, while field experience reveals gaps between theoretical survival and practical reality. Her unauthorized notebooks record symptoms and treatments diverging from approved medical protocols, creating knowledge base proving invaluable when official systems fail, but potentially heretical when measured against doctrinal purity. Each patient represents statistical variance requiring processing through medical procedures designed to optimize resource allocation rather than individual survival, triage decisions made according to evacuation capacity rather than medical necessity. The administrative horror reveals itself through systematic failure, transforming mathematical precision into mass casualty event, as battery commanders receive orders to conserve munitions through premature barrage lift, coordinated with supply chain calculations, prioritizing ammunition stocks over tactical effectiveness. The decision arrives through logistics channels treating shells as inventory requiring management rather than tactical assets requiring proper application, transforming Valdris's elegant mathematics into practical demonstration of institutional priorities. The ink-smudged timing margins in Fireplan 7B become literal death sentences as artillery lifts 3 minutes early across 2 battery sections, abandoning advancing infantry to enemy fire that fills the vacuum with mechanical precision designed to exploit exactly such coordination failures. Counter-battery fire responds with mathematical accuracy as enemy gunners execute targeting solutions calculated to intersect with Imperial coordination breakdowns, their shells arriving precisely where Fireplan timing should have provided protection, but administrative efficiency created vulnerability windows. Shrapnel plows through gaps where suppressive fire should have maintained coverage. Mines rearm into footfalls of soldiers who trusted the schedule, and men who rehearsed courage die while moving correctly according to doctrine that prioritizes compliance over survival. Voxnets collapse under cascading authentication failures as moisture-damaged challenge codes create deadly coordination gaps throughout the assault force, transforming communication systems into liability rather than asset through systematic breakdown. The authentication sheets bear water damage, smearing critical sequences, while yesterday's codes travel forward with today's rations through supply chain confusion that transforms administrative incompetence into tactical crisis. Friendly fire incidents multiply as units lose identification protocols and artillery observers mistake Imperial positions for enemy targets, adding administrative casualties to enemy action in mathematical progression, validating the 15-hour calculation through compound failure modes that exclude administrative misadventure from official statistics. Survival innovations prove crucial as modified equipment saves lives through unauthorized effectiveness that cannot be officially acknowledged but proves tactically superior to approved systems. Korvax filter modifications allow continued operation while standard equipment fails, creating survival advantage spreading through informal networks as soldiers observe practical results and abandon doctrinal compliance for tactical effectiveness. SAP trenches provide escape routes, exploiting terrain knowledge accumulated through underground information sharing rather than official reconnaissance, demonstrating how survival networks function as parallel command structure based on competence rather than authority. Informal leadership networks maintain cohesion when official command structure fails through systematic breakdown of communication and coordination systems, creating tactical effectiveness emerging from human initiative rather than institutional direction. Veterans assume tactical leadership based on survival competence, while official commanders struggle with equipment failures and communication breakdowns, transforming command authority into liability. The networks prove more effective than doctrine because they prioritize survival over compliance, creating tactical advantages that cannot be officially recognized without acknowledging systematic institutional failure. The statistical curve steepens as planned through mathematical precision, treating human mortality as predictable variable requiring systematic management, bodies accumulating according to Valdris's calculations as artillery, mines, and enemy fire achieve projected casualty rates within acceptable variance parameters. The killing architecture functions as designed, consuming human material at projected rates while maintaining operational efficiency through systematic resource management that validates 15-hour projections through practical application, converting theoretical mathematics into measurable reality. Yet individual agency creates statistical anomalies, disrupting logistical projections through unpredictable survival patterns, as some refuse to comply with numbers through initiative that cannot be calculated or controlled through administrative mechanisms. Korvax survival techniques spread through informal networks faster than official doctrine, creating tactical effectiveness exceeding projected parameters while undermining predictability that logistics systems require for efficient operation. Each survival beyond the curve represents mathematical deviation requiring processing through institutional mechanisms designed to maintain statistical compliance rather than tactical effectiveness. Yekta discovers contradiction between doctrine and survival as prayers fail to stop shrapnel while Korvax modifications preserve life through unauthorized effectiveness violating sacred protocols while delivering practical results. Her faith in imperial mathematics encounters practical reality, suggesting survival requires abandoning approved procedures for techniques that work but cannot be officially acknowledged without undermining the entire system of authority governing imperial military operations through mathematical precision rather than tactical adaptation. As smoke clears and casualty reports begin flowing through surviving Vox channels, bodies pile according to mathematics written to be true, yet statistical noise acquires names through human agency refusing mathematical fate. The fundamental question emerges with brutal clarity. How does the system process soldiers who survive beyond statistical expectations? And what institutional response awaits those who exceed their mathematical fate through individual initiative disrupting predictable patterns required for efficient resource management? The answers will determine whether survival represents statistical deviation requiring correction or human potential requiring systematic suppression through institutional mechanisms designed to maintain mathematical compliance rather than tactical effectiveness. The answers will determine whether survival represents statistical deviation requiring correction or human potential requiring systematic suppression through institutional mechanisms designed to maintain mathematical compliance rather than tactical effectiveness. As smoke clears and casualty reports flow through surviving Vox channels, the aftermath reveals systematic processing of human variants through facilities that transform medical necessity into administrative problem requiring institutional solution rather than celebrating tactical success. The aid post operates with industrial efficiency as wounded accumulate according to mathematical projections, its canvas and ferrocrete structure functioning as triage factory where human suffering becomes inventory management problem. Medic Senna moves through controlled chaos with practiced economy, her hands working within logic that treats rank as medical priority rather than wound severity. The kudzu evacuation codes determine fate through bureaucratic rather than medical assessment, their color-coded tags functioning like industrial sorting mechanisms designed to preserve institutional value over individual life. Kudzu Alpha designates officers for immediate orbital medical transport regardless of injury severity, their survival deemed strategically vital for maintaining command integrity through resource allocation that prioritizes replacement costs over human need. A major with superficial shrapnel wounds receives priority extraction, while enlisted soldiers with sucking chest wounds await transport in field treatment areas where supplies calculate projected throughput rather than actual medical necessity. Senna watches shuttle crews step over stabilized privates to reach officers whose rank insignia shine brighter than their wounds, the mathematics proving elegant in their cruelty. Officer replacement exceeds enlisted replacement by factors requiring preferential resource allocation that transforms medical triage into a counting exercise. Sergeant Korvac emerges from this processing as statistical deviant, whose continued existence disrupts supply calculations and replacement schedules through unpredictable longevity exceeding administrative parameters. A clerk scans his ident plate and frowns as the slate flashes variance flags indicating expected life hours exceeded, his 41 documented combat hours representing mathematical impossibility requiring institutional processing. Replacement schedules assume his absence. Rations were packed for ghosts, ammunition routes calculated for empty hands. His survival tugs at tables invisible to field personnel, but real in their logistical consequences, transforming tactical competence into administrative crisis requiring correction rather than analysis. Administrative confusion multiplies as survivors exceed statistical allocation through individual initiative that cannot be calculated or controlled through mathematical modeling designed to predict human behavior through aggregate analysis rather than individual variation. Supply requisitions fail when units maintain strength beyond projected depletion rates, creating bottlenecks as replacement schedules assume casualty rates that survival networks disrupt through unauthorized effectiveness. Food allocation calculations break down when more soldiers survive to consume rations than mathematical models predict, each extra mouth representing deviation from projections that logistics systems require for efficient operation across subsector-wide coordination involving millions of soldiers and billions of tons of supplies. Ghost units emerge as natural consequence of statistical deviation through survival patterns exceeding administrative recognition, creating tactical formations that officially no longer exist, but continue operating effectively through informal networks based on competence rather than compliance. The Vostroyan 47th officially reports 67% strength, while actually maintaining 83% through survivors who should have died according to mathematical projections, but continue fighting through techniques that cannot be officially acknowledged without undermining statistical prediction governing imperial logistics and tactical planning. These ghost formations exploit administrative blindness through parallel command structures emerging from practical necessity rather than institutional design. Without tables to feed them, they feed themselves through systematic scavenging that bleeds resources from units still officially recognized. Without columns to count them, they move without authorization through terrain knowledge accumulated via underground information sharing rather than official reconnaissance. They pass signals that never existed in training primers, hold positions unmarked on command maps, and requisition through theft rather than proper channels, while maintaining tactical effectiveness exceeding that of properly supplied formations following approved doctrine. Trooper Yekta discovers this contradiction as her faith in Imperial mathematics encounters practical reality, suggesting survival requires abandoning approved procedures for techniques that work but cannot be officially acknowledged. Her prayers, once recited at barrage cadence, become shorter and closer to breathing as she learns Korvac's heresies without naming them as such. Filters that violate sacred protocols while extending life, movement patterns that abandon parade ground formations for tactical effectiveness, pauses that contradict manual timing while avoiding mind cycles. Each lesson represents accumulated wisdom, proving medically and tactically valuable but institutionally dangerous because it demonstrates systematic failure of approved systems designed by administrators who never calculated survival odds through battlefield observation. The institutional problem reveals itself through fundamental contradiction between tactical effectiveness and administrative efficiency, as the system requires predictable failure rates to maintain logistical coordination across operations, involving mathematical projections governing everything from ammunition production schedules to corpse starch processing capacity. Battlefield evolution creates unpredictable survival patterns, disrupting these calculations through human agency refusing mathematical fate, transforming tactical improvement into administrative crisis, requiring institutional response designed to restore predictability rather than exploit effectiveness. Survival beyond 15 hours begins to feel like institutional betrayal, rather than personal victory, as soldiers discover their continued existence creates problems for systems designed to process their deaths according to predetermined schedules. Korvac experiences this transformation as psychological burden, understanding that his survival techniques disrupt supply chains while potentially triggering commissariat investigation into statistical deviation that could classify tactical competence as potential insubordination. The sensation spreads like infection, understanding that survival beyond allocation represents theft, not from enemy, but from machine expecting absence, making tactical success feel like administrative failure requiring correction through disciplinary action. Senna's unauthorized notebooks circulate through Wounded faster than official pamphlets, copied in smudged hands and hidden inside prayer books, as survival innovations spread through informal networks prioritizing effectiveness over compliance. The knowledge proves invaluable when official systems fail, but potentially heretical when measured against mathematical doctrine, creating moral inversion where human agency becomes administrative problem requiring systematic suppression through mechanisms designed to maintain predictable casualty rates rather than maximize survival probability. As reports flow upward, documenting statistical anomalies requiring explanation, administrative pressure mounts for correction through institutional mechanisms designed to process deviation rather than analyze effectiveness. The survivors carry knowledge that could revolutionize Imperial tactical doctrine while understanding that sharing this knowledge constitutes heresy against mathematical certainty, governing military operations through statistical prediction rather than battlefield adaptation. How do evolved survivors compare to fresh Imperial doctrine in effectiveness, and what happens when survival tactics spread between units through networks that prioritize competence over compliance? The answers will determine whether the Imperial military machine adapts to battlefield reality or crushes human initiative to preserve mathematical predictability that enables efficient resource management at the cost of tactical effectiveness and human survival. How do evolved survivors compare to fresh Imperial doctrine in effectiveness? And what happens when survival tactics spread between units through networks that prioritize competence over compliance? The answers emerge through systematic observation as knowledge flows through channels that operate faster than official communications, while remaining invisible to administrative oversight designed to monitor compliance rather than effectiveness. Survival information spreads like infection through wounded soldiers who carry techniques between units, creating cross-contamination of tactical competence that disrupts mathematical projections governing Imperial military operations across the subsector. Veterans become informal teachers through necessity rather than design, their accumulated knowledge proving too valuable to contain within official channels that prioritize doctrinal purity over practical effectiveness. Korvac demonstrates equipment modifications during routine maintenance sessions, his hands showing rather than telling as he guides conscripts through unauthorized alterations. A lesson on field stripping a jammed lasgun transforms into demonstration of percussion, clearing using boot heel impact, a technique saving precious seconds while bypassing the approved 27-step field manual. Water purification sessions become exchanges of techniques for distilling moisture from slag rather than relying on standard-issue tablets that fail against the plane's unique contaminants. The teaching process operates through ritualized instruction disguised as compliance with regulations requiring equipment maintenance and tactical review. Veterans share terrain reading through map exercises that appear routine while conveying survival information about mine cycles, drainage patterns, and enemy observation posts accumulated through battlefield experience exceeding statistical probability. Chalk markings appear on culvert mouths indicating safe passages, 2 dots, and a bar meaning mines asleep, 1 dot meaning careful timing required. These symbols spread faster than official communications carried by informal runners designated greys, who thread between companies passing timing marks and filter modifications while belonging to no official order of battle. A parallel command structure emerges through natural selection, favoring competence over compliance, as soldiers discover that following unofficial guidance improves survival probability, while official doctrine increases mortality risk through systematic failure to adapt battlefield conditions. Veterans assume tactical authority, whose advice carries more weight than commissioned orders when survival depends on individual initiative rather than institutional direction. Junior officers, fresh from doctrinal schools, find themselves relying on hard-won experience of enlisted personnel whose survival metrics make them statistical anomalies requiring administrative explanation. The core institutional crisis reveals itself as units abandoning doctrine become demonstrably more effective through survival-based tactics, while the system requires doctrinal compliance to maintain control over military operations through predictable behavior patterns. Effectiveness and control prove mutually exclusive when battlefield conditions require adaptation, contradicting mathematical projections governing logistics planning designed to support millions of soldiers through standardized procedures rather than individualized tactics. The contradiction cannot be resolved without choosing between tactical success and administrative efficiency. Mathematical crisis develops as the 15-hour rule breaks down under systematic adoption of survival-based tactics disrupting casualty projections governing Imperial logistics planning across subsector-wide operations. Supply chains recalibrated around predictable failure rates experience shortages when units maintain strength beyond statistical allocation through unauthorized effectiveness. A company projected to stand at 43% after 18 hours still musters 71%, creating cascading supply problems. Rations run short where bodies were meant absent. Evacuation flights arrive late. Corpse starch processors idle, while replacement schedules fail when fewer soldiers die than mathematical models predict. Administrative confusion multiplies as survival tactics spread between units through wounded soldiers carrying knowledge across regimental boundaries, creating cross-contamination of tactical competence, disrupting unit-specific casualty projections used for supply planning and replacement scheduling. Each transfer of survival knowledge represents mathematical deviation from projections, assuming doctrinal compliance, creating predictable outcomes, transforming tactical improvement into administrative crisis, requiring institutional response designed to restore statistical predictability rather than exploit battlefield effectiveness. The phenomenon acquires official designation as tactical recidivism through commissariat documentation, classifying survival beyond statistical allocation as potential insubordination requiring investigation and correction. Commissar reports describe veterans contaminating conscripts with non-standard procedures that undermine doctrinal compliance while creating unpredictable operational variables, disrupting logistics planning. The terminology transforms tactical competence into disciplinary problem, suggesting soldiers surviving through unauthorized methods represent institutional threat requiring suppression rather than tactical asset-deserving development. Field observations demonstrate measurable tactical superiority of units employing survival-based tactics over formations following approved doctrine, creating evidence proving effectiveness of unauthorized techniques while simultaneously providing justification for disciplinary action against soldiers whose competence threatens institutional control. The survivors carry knowledge proving superior to official doctrine, while understanding that sharing constitutes heresy against mathematical certainty, governing military operations through statistical compliance rather than battlefield effectiveness. What institutional countermeasures will the Imperium deploy against effective soldiers whose tactical competence threatens mathematical predictability? And how does the system resolve the fundamental contradiction between battlefield effectiveness and administrative control requiring predictable casualty rates for efficient resource management across billions of soldiers and trillions of tons of supplies? What institutional countermeasures will the Imperium deploy against effective soldiers whose tactical competence threatens mathematical predictability? And how does the system resolve the fundamental contradiction between battlefield effectiveness and administrative control requiring predictable casualty rates for efficient resource management across billions of soldiers and trillions of tons of supplies? The answer arrives through sealed directives that transform tactical success into administrative crisis, requiring systematic correction through mechanisms designed to restore mathematical compliance rather than exploit battlefield effectiveness. Commissar Valdek receives classified instructions through Vox transmission designating survival beyond statistical allocation as variance requiring correction through enhanced morale supervision. The orders carry mathematical precision. Units exceeding projected casualty rates by more than 12% trigger mandatory investigation, while unauthorized survival techniques constitute potential tactical heresy, regardless of demonstrated effectiveness. His duty transforms from maintaining morale to suppressing competence that threatens institutional predictability through systematic application of disciplinary pressure designed to restore doctrinal compliance. The bureaucratic horror reveals itself through cascading supply chain failures as successful units disrupt Imperial logistics because their survival exceeds planning parameters governing resource allocation across subsector operations. Ration convoys arrive undersized, where mathematical projections calculated consumption for ghosts rather than breathing soldiers. Medical evacuation flights idle in holding patterns because forecasted casualties still draw breath. Corpse starch processing facilities experience throughput shortfalls when fewer bodies arrive than mathematical models predict, disrupting food production chains feeding billions whose survival depends on predictable military mortality rates, converting human casualties into consumable resources through systematic processing. Administrative confusion multiplies as ammunition factories gear production schedules around replacement rates derived from casualty mathematics, creating shortages when units maintain operational tempo beyond statistical allocation. Transport capacity calculations fail when evacuation requirements exceed projections based on 15-hour mortality curves. Each survivor beyond mathematical expectation represents deviation, multiplying through logistics networks until tactical success becomes systemic crisis, requiring institutional response, prioritizing predictability over effectiveness through systematic suppression of unauthorized competence. Survival tactics begin classification as potential heresy through commissariat documentation, treating unauthorized effectiveness as doctrinal deviation, requiring correction rather than tactical innovation deserving analysis. Equipment modifications violate sacred protocols governing machine spirit appeasement, creating technical heresy against approved procedures. Unauthorized communication methods constitute security breaches enabling enemy intelligence gathering. Informal command structures represent insubordination against institutional authority, requiring disciplinary response regardless of battlefield results. The classification system transforms competence into crime through administrative mechanisms designed to maintain compliance rather than exploit tactical advantage. The ultimate revelation emerges through archived documentation, exposing Circular 866.M41's true purpose. The 15-hour calculation wasn't created to predict death, but to enforce it through systematic application of mathematical requirements governing Imperial operations. The circular functions as an administrative tool, mandating predictable casualty rates rather than battlefield observation documenting natural mortality patterns. The system needs death on schedule to function efficiently, transforming human mortality from unfortunate consequence into operational requirement enforced through institutional mechanisms ensuring mathematical compliance rather than maximizing survival probability. Administrative misadventure categories expand systematically to absorb inconvenient survival statistics through reclassification, maintaining mathematical purity by defining deviation as measurement error rather than tactical improvement. The variance normalization protocols multiply: environmental fatigue, non-combat positional loss, duplicated return to duty, each providing bureaucratic mechanism for eliminating evidence that survival exceeds projections through individual initiative rather than institutional design. Soldiers surviving through unauthorized techniques disappear from casualty reports through administrative processing that classifies continued existence as statistical noise requiring correction rather than human achievement deserving recognition. Effective soldiers face systematic redeployment to attritional sinks through transfer orders disguised as tactical necessity but functioning as disciplinary action designed to restore statistical compliance through exposure to higher mortality environments. Veterans whose survival techniques disrupt mathematical projections receive assignment to operations with casualty rates exceeding demonstrated competence, creating administrative solution to soldiers who refuse to die according to schedule. Sergeant Korvac receives orders folded inside commendation for demonstrated gallantry, understanding immediately that merit posting means concentration of proven assets at decisive points, where the statistical curve can be restored through overwhelming application of lethal force. The system resolves effectiveness versus control through systematic elimination of tactical innovation, threatening mathematical predictability required for efficient resource management across Imperial military operations. Field commanders receive guidance emphasizing maintenance of projected casualty rates for operational efficiency, with success measured by mathematical compliance rather than mission accomplishment. Units achieving objectives while exceeding survival projections face investigation for potential doctrinal deviation, while formations suffering casualties according to mathematical predictions receive commendation regardless of tactical failure. Trooper Yekta discovers this contradiction as survival knowledge conflicts with institutional loyalty, her hands learning Korvax modifications while her mouth recites approved litanies. Medic Senna copies final pages from memory into hollow prayer book spines before transfer orders arrive. The choice crystallizes with brutal clarity. Compliance promises sanctity and clean ledger entries, while survival promises suspicion, investigation, and travel orders to map squares where artillery answers less frequently, and mathematical curves achieve restoration through systematic attrition designed to eliminate statistical anomalies, disrupting administrative efficiency. What does this reveal about the true nature of Imperial military doctrine as control system prioritizing mathematical predictability over tactical effectiveness? And how do individual soldiers navigate the impossible choice between survival through unauthorized competence and compliance with institutional requirements, treating human mortality as operational necessity rather than tragic consequence? What does this reveal about the true nature of Imperial military doctrine as control system prioritizing mathematical predictability over tactical effectiveness? And how do individual soldiers navigate the impossible choice between survival through unauthorized competence and compliance with institutional requirements, treating human mortality as operational necessity rather than tragic consequence? The complete truth emerges through classified Munitorum files that strip away euphemism to reveal the administrative framework governing Imperial military operations through mathematical precision designed to control rather than preserve human life. The archives beneath Subsector Command preserve the genesis of Circular 1866.M41 in dust-sealed committee minutes that document transformation of bureaucratic convenience into sacred doctrine. Logistics Committee Tertius 7 authored the circular during the Hadrian Reach Crusade, facing practical problem requiring administrative solution. Supply chains demanded predictable consumption rates for efficient resource allocation across operations involving millions of soldiers and billions of tons of material moving through warp routes operating on schedules measured in decades rather than tactical hours. The 15-hour figure emerged through pure bureaucratic coincidence during the pacification of Glavius Prime, where actual mortality rates matched theoretical projections by statistical accident rather than analytical precision. Committee records show Kester Tertiary Valdris celebrating this convergence as validation of mathematical modeling, proposing systematic application across all Imperial military operations regardless of tactical conditions. The mathematics proved elegant in their administrative simplicity: 3 5-hour ration blocks per soldier, optimal shuttle crew cycling without fatigue, protocol violations, confessor rotation schedules preventing vocal decay, corpse starch processing achieving maximum throughput without storage bottlenecks. Since adoption, commanders receive explicit guidance to enforce the 15-hour standard rather than respond to battlefield conditions through tactical adaptation, transforming mathematical projection into operational requirement enforced through disciplinary mechanisms. Brigade planning documents reveal systematic coordination designed to achieve statistical compliance rather than mission success, with artillery schedules synchronized to casualty curves rather than enemy vulnerability windows. Attack timing serves mathematical necessity rather than tactical opportunity, creating operational framework where statistics govern tactics rather than supporting strategic objectives. The language manipulation reveals institutional horror through systematic redefinition of tactical failure as administrative success. Premature artillery lifts receive coding as munitions optimization events through bureaucratic terminology, transforming coordination breakdowns into resource management victories, while casualties resulting from these failures disappear into acceptable variance categories, maintaining statistical purity by classifying systematic failure as measurement error. survival beyond mathematical allocation becomes statistical noise requiring correction through administrative mechanisms designed to restore predictable patterns rather than analyze tactical effectiveness. The terminology creates institutional blindness by defining inconvenient reality as deviation from mathematical truth rather than evidence contradicting theoretical projections. The institutional cannibalism operates through systematic design, treating battlefields like the Black Basilica Plain as engineered resource sinks requiring predictable consumption rates for administrative efficiency. The plain functions as mathematical necessity rather than tactical objective, its killing architecture calibrated to consume specific quantities of human material per operational cycle while maintaining enemy engagement sufficient to justify continued resource allocation. Both sides participate in systematic attrition, serving administrative requirements rather than strategic objectives, creating perpetual consumption, satisfying bureaucratic needs for predictable casualty rates that enable efficient logistics planning across subsector-wide operations. Administrative documentation reveals coordination between tactical planning and resource management through mathematical frameworks treating human life as renewable resource requiring sustainable harvesting rather than tactical asset deserving preservation. Casualty projections integrate with food production schedules, corpse starch processing capacity, and population replacement rates across hundreds of worlds whose tithes must balance military consumption with industrial productivity. The mathematics create closed loops where military mortality feeds civilian survival through systematic processing, converting battlefield casualties into consumable resources distributed across imperial population centers requiring predictable input flows. The mathematics of death transform into mathematics of control through systematic application of statistical requirements governing human behavior across imperial military operations. Predictable mortality rates enable efficient resource allocation by eliminating variables that disrupt logistics planning, while systematic casualty processing provides consumable resources feeding billions whose survival depends on converting military deaths into industrial inputs through mechanized processing. The system requires death on schedule to function efficiently, transforming human mortality from tactical consequence into administrative necessity enforced through institutional mechanisms ensuring mathematical compliance over tactical effectiveness. Committee correspondence reveals the ultimate cynicism through unguarded admission. Round numbers travel. Field officers understand them. So do shipmasters. So do priests. The faith accepts what the ledger can carry. The mathematics become articles of faith because faith enables systematic control over human behavior through predictable patterns serving administrative efficiency rather than tactical success or human preservation. What happens to the human cost when it exceeds mathematical projections designed to maintain administrative efficiency rather than maximize survival probability, and how do survivors carry the moral weight of outliving their statistical allocation while understanding their continued existence disrupts systematic resource management requiring predictable death rates for efficient operation across imperial civilization, spanning millions of worlds and trillions of human lives whose survival depends on systematic conversion of military casualties into consumable resources through industrial processing that transforms battlefield mortality into civilian sustenance. What happens to the human cost when it exceeds mathematical projections designed to maintain administrative efficiency rather than maximize survival probability? And how do survivors carry the moral weight of outliving their statistical allocation while understanding their continued existence disrupts systematic resource management requiring predictable death rates for efficient operation across imperial civilization? The answer emerges through psychological transformation that proves irreversible once soldiers discover that survival requires thinking beyond institutional parameters, creating internal schism between tactical competence and ideological compliance that separates them from imperial doctrine through quiet disillusionment rather than dramatic rebellion. Sergeant Korvac embodies this transformation through accumulated behavioral changes that signal psychological departure from imperial ideology without conscious apostasy. He stops carving tally marks after the 15th scratch, understanding instinctively that adding a 16th would constitute vandalism against the creed governing his ration allocations and administrative existence. Instead, he counts through unauthorized metrics, mine cycle timing measured by respirator heat, mortar crew correction intervals, the duration between confession and psychological stabilization. His teaching becomes accident rather than instruction, casual remarks about wind patterns and smoke coloration that convey survival knowledge through euphemism designed to avoid commissariat attention while preserving human life through practical competence. The psychological cost manifests as administrative fatigue rather than revolutionary fervor, a quiet exhaustion with institutional promises that prove systematically false when measured against battlefield reality. Soldiers surviving beyond statistical allocation discover that imperial doctrine represents administrative convenience designed to maintain morale during systematic consumption rather than genuine commitment to human preservation through tactical effectiveness. This realization creates cognitive separation from ideology that treats mathematical projections as divine revelation rather than bureaucratic, tool-serving logistics requirements over human survival through practical adaptation. Trooper Yekta experiences this transformation as her prayers compress from liturgical precision into breathing exercises serving immediate survival rather than spiritual comfort, her faith adapting to battlefield demands while losing institutional structure. Hope transforms from expectation of rescue into coping ritual maintaining psychological stability while accepting institutional abandonment as operational necessity rather than temporary condition requiring patience. Her loyalty shifts from abstract imperial doctrine toward tangible human bonds forged through shared unauthorized survival, creating emotional investment in squad preservation rather than mathematical compliance with casualty projections serving administrative convenience. Medic Senna documents this psychological evolution through unauthorized observations recording symptoms that official medical protocols fail to address, her notebooks capturing the spiritual cost of survival beyond institutional expectations. She observes soldiers carrying guilt over consuming resources allocated for replacements that mathematical models predicted would be necessary after their projected deaths, creating psychological burden where continued existence feels like theft from system expecting absence according to statistical convenience. The sensation spreads through survivor networks like emotional contagion, understanding that effectiveness beyond allocation constitutes administrative heresy requiring correction through disciplinary mechanisms designed to restore predictable patterns. The moral inversion completes itself through systematic revelation that righteousness requires refusing to waste human life, satisfying administrative schedules rather than accepting martyrdom as spiritual necessity. Survival becomes deviation from sacred mathematics rather than personal victory, while tactical competence transforms into potential insubordination, threatening institutional authority, requiring systematic compliance with mathematical projections. Veterans develop parallel ethics prioritizing human preservation over statistical compliance, their informal creed treating individual initiative as sacred duty rather than doctrinal violation requiring correction through disciplinary action. The most effective imperial soldiers prove to be those who've learned to function independently of imperial systems while remaining loyal to human survival rather than institutional doctrine, creating fundamental contradiction between tactical competence and ideological compliance. These veterans carry knowledge that could revolutionize imperial military operations while understanding that sharing constitutes heresy against mathematical certainty governing imperial civilization through statistical predictability rather than battlefield effectiveness. Their accumulated wisdom proves superior to approved training while simultaneously classifying them as ideological threats requiring systematic monitoring through commissariat oversight designed to detect deviation from approved behavior patterns. Administrative fatigue, rather than revolutionary consciousness, drives this separation, soldiers becoming precise rather than rebellious as they discover that institutional promises serve bureaucratic convenience rather than human preservation. They maintain loyalty to species survival while losing faith in imperial methodology, their effectiveness increasing through unauthorized competence, while their ideological reliability decreases through accumulated evidence that doctrine serves administrative control rather than tactical success or human welfare through practical adaptation. The final contradiction crystallizes with brutal clarity. The Imperium's greatest military assets prove to be its greatest ideological threats, because they've learned to think beyond the numbers governing imperial operations through mathematical precision designed to control human behavior rather than maximize tactical effectiveness. Veterans who master survival beyond statistical expectations develop independent thinking that threatens institutional authority, requiring systematic compliance with projections, serving logistics convenience over human preservation, making their competence both tactically invaluable and politically dangerous to system requiring predictable failure rates for efficient operation. What does this transformation mean for imperial authority structures requiring systematic compliance with mathematical projections governing human behavior through predictable patterns, serving administrative efficiency, and how does the system maintain control over soldiers who've transcended institutional limitations through accumulated knowledge proving superior to approved doctrine, while simultaneously threatening the entire framework of authority governing imperial military operations through statistical compliance rather than tactical effectiveness? What does this transformation mean for imperial authority structures requiring systematic compliance with mathematical projections governing human behavior through predictable patterns serving administrative efficiency? And how does the system maintain control over soldiers who've transcended institutional limitations through accumulated knowledge proving superior to approved doctrine while simultaneously threatening the entire framework of authority governing imperial military operations through statistical compliance rather than tactical effectiveness? The institutional resolution arrives through systematic suppression rather than adaptation, revealing the Imperium's fundamental commitment to mathematical control over tactical effectiveness. The Officio Prefectus issues Sealed Addendum 866 Theta, redefining unauthorized survival techniques as tactical heresy, requiring immediate correction regardless of demonstrated battlefield effectiveness. Doctrinal harmonization teams deploy across affected sectors, their mandate treating competence as variance requiring elimination rather than tactical innovation deserving analysis. Commissariat reports document veterans contaminating conscripts through non-standard procedures that undermine mathematical compliance while creating unpredictable operational variables, disrupting logistics planning. The terminology transforms survival into crime, making tactical competence evidence of potential insubordination rather than military asset deserving recognition. Survivors face impossible choice crystallizing with brutal clarity: return to doctrinal compliance, accepting statistical death according to mathematical projections, or continue evolving while risking classification as traitor, requiring systematic elimination. Sergeant Korvac receives transfer orders disguised as commendation, destination, coordinates marking map squares notorious for consuming statistical anomalies through overwhelming lethality. Trooper Yekta faces assignment as training instructor with explicit orders to teach approved doctrine while suppressing unauthorized techniques that preserved her life. Medic Senna receives offer of shipboard medical posting contingent on surrendering her unauthorized notebooks for doctrinal review, understanding immediately that accumulated knowledge must be hidden or destroyed to avoid heresy charges. The final revelation strips away euphemism to expose institutional truth. 15 hours represents not statistical reality, but administrative requirement enforced through systematic necessity governing Imperial operations. The system needs predictable failure to maintain control over both material resources and human ideology through patterns serving bureaucratic efficiency rather than tactical success or human preservation. Predictable mortality enabled systematic resource allocation across subsector operations while preventing development of independent thinking that threatens institutional authority, requiring compliance with projections rather than adaptation to battlefield conditions. Death on schedule serves dual function as logistics tool and ideological control mechanism, ensuring ammunition factories gear production around replacement rates, while corpse starch processing maintains throughput feeding billions whose survival depends on converting military casualties into consumable resources. Veterans who survive beyond mathematical allocation acquire knowledge proving superior to institutional training while simultaneously threatening the entire framework of control governing Imperial military operations through statistical compliance rather than battlefield adaptation requiring individual initiative. Administrative processing continues with mechanical precision as the Valhallan 104th Ice Warriors receives deployment briefing on the Black Basilica Plain, their orientation maintaining institutional continuity through systematic repetition of mathematical projections governing expected mortality rates. Fresh conscripts receive explanation of 15-hour life expectancy presented as enemy capability rather than Imperial policy, their psychological preparation ensuring compliance with statistical requirements through acceptance of mathematical fate rather than development of survival competence threatening institutional predictability. Evolved survivors observe from shadows as this perpetuation unfolds, carrying knowledge that could revolutionize Imperial tactical doctrine while understanding that sharing constitutes heresy against mathematical certainty governing Imperial civilization. They watch new arrivals carving tally marks into weapon stocks with ritualistic precision, understanding that each scratch represents acceptance of institutional requirement rather than battlefield preparation, mathematical compliance rather than tactical competence for survival through practical adaptation. The knowledge circulates through underground networks operating within Imperial discipline structures through careful euphemism and coded instruction, veterans becoming quiet contraband moving along trench lines as nameless advisors. They arrive with rations and leave with rumors, correcting maps through thumbnail gestures, tapping bulkheads twice to indicate mine reset timing, trading gauze lengths for whispered promises without names. They teach posture rather than rebellion, sharing survival techniques through equipment modification demonstrations that appear to support Imperial doctrine while actually subverting it through practical application. Institutional continuity ensures mathematical projections governing human mortality remain unchanged regardless of accumulated evidence suggesting alternative approaches could improve tactical effectiveness while preserving human life. The system maintains coherence by defining deviation as measurement error rather than tactical improvement, classifying survival beyond allocation as statistical noise requiring correction rather than human achievement, deserving systematic analysis for broader application across Imperial military operations. The procedural creed emerges from this processing as unofficial doctrine shared through survivor networks while remaining invisible to commissariat oversight designed to detect deviation from approved behavior patterns. Veterans whisper the formula during equipment checks and maintenance sessions, their accumulated wisdom about institutional reality requiring mathematical compliance while preserving human agency through tactical competence that cannot be officially acknowledged without undermining the entire framework of authority governing Imperial operations. Count your hours, question the count, survive the mathematics.